In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King says in a letter to Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour that Jordanian institutions work in a transparent manner as one team to serve the public interest. Egypt charges former President Mohammed Morsi and 35 other Islamists with conspiring with foreign groups to commit terrorist acts in the country. And South Sudan clashes kill up to 500 people, and the U.S. Secretary of State says political differences should be resolved by peaceful and democratic means. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King said the Jordanian national civil and military institutions are like one body that works in harmony and with integrity to serve the public interest. In a letter to Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour, the King thanked the cadres and personnel of all ministries, service departments, the Greater Amman Municipality, the Armed Forces, as well as the Civil Defense, Public Security and Gendarmerie departments who performed their duties efficiently and responsibly during the recent snowstorm. The King hailed the high sense of awareness among the citizens and the positive initiatives by the private sector institutions and the civil society in dealing with the exceptional circumstances. His Majesty stressed the need to focus on objective facts and documenting data when reviewing and evaluating performance over the past few days. He also stressed the need for openness and objective and constructive criticism, which are the basis of reforms that we all believe in. His Majesty the King received President of the Arab Parliament Ahmed Jarwan and the accompanying delegation currently participating in a conference of the Arab Parliament. The King stressed the importance of the Arab Parliament in institutionalizing and supporting reform and development programs and enhancing dialogue and the democratic approach in the Arab world. His Majesty stressed the need to maintain cooperation and coordination among the Arab parliaments. He also emphasized the need to build on the results of the conference to enhance Arab solidarity and effective joint Arab action. The King and the Arab Parliament's President reviewed the latest developments in the region, namely the Syrian crisis. The King reiterated Jordan's support for any political solution that ends the suffering of the Syrian people and preserve the country's unity. He also reviewed Jordan's efforts to deal with the large number of Syrian refugees in the country. The meeting also touched on the efforts to achieve peace in the region, leading to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in line with the two-state solution and the Arab Peace Initiative. The conference is attended by representatives of all Arab parliaments, Shura Council, as well as members of the Arab Parliament's permanent committees. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour instructed that work starts at 10 a.m. tomorrow due to freeze and frost formation in the early morning hours. The decision includes all public institutions, private and public schools, as well as universities across Jordan. The lower house of Parliament held a session chaired by First Deputy Speaker Ahmed Safadi to discuss a number of issues pertaining to electoral constituencies and the fallout of the recent snowstorm. During the session, attended by Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour and cabinet ministers, the deputies thanked the government for all the measures it took to ease the impact of the blizzard on the citizens and urged the government to put even more effective plans to adequately deal with such a calamity. They also thanked the security apparatuses and the armed forces who worked round the clock to provide services to the citizens. A number of deputies, however, accused the government of failing to deal with the snowstorm, with some even calling for its resignation. In Syria, rebels have rejected overtures from the United States for negotiations. The Syrian government said it was reprehensible that Washington was prepared to enter a dialogue with the Islamic Front. The development highlighted Washington's difficulties in engaging with the faction-ridden rebels in Syria's civil war. With 5 weeks to go before UN peace talks convene in Geneva, it is still unclear who represents the opposition. Meanwhile, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons announced that the month-long tender for the commercial destruction of hundreds of tons of industrial chemicals and toxic waste from Syria's chemical weapons program will start tomorrow, with contracts likely to go to a handful of firms. In Iraq, at least 5 people were killed and 10 injured when a suicide bomber blew himself up among a group of Shiite visitors near Baquba, northeast of Baghdad. 2 soldiers and 2 citizens were also killed in 2 separate attacks in Mosul, north of the capital. Officials added that such attacks will continue until the next elections. Egypt's public prosecutor charged former President Mohamed Morsi and 35 other Islamists with conspiring with foreign groups to commit terrorist acts in Egypt. The charges leveled against Morsi and the other top Muslim Brotherhood members could result in their execution. Morsi is already standing trial for inciting violence during protests outside the presidential palace a year ago when he was still in office. The prosecutors said the Brotherhood had committed acts of violence and terrorism in Egypt and prepared a terrorist plan that included an alliance with the Palestinian group Hamas and Lebanon's Hezbollah. South Sudanese President Salva Kiir said he was ready for any dialogue with former Vice President Riek Machar, whom he accused of being behind a coup attempt. Fighting between South Sudanese soldiers spread to the flashpoint town of Bor, raising fears of a broader civil conflict in the 2-year-old nation. Soldiers in the capital Juba have clashed since Sunday, killing up to 500 people. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the opposing faction must prevent tension from escalating. This report has more.
More than 16,000 people have sought shelter after 2 days of intense fighting in South Sudan's capital, Juba. Many of the displaced take refuge in a UN compound next to the airport. Aid workers say the number of refugees is rising and food supplies are running low. The UN says up to 500 people have died in clashes between rival army factions.
So, I had my cousin over there. He's not even being buried right now. And I had just a lot of friends that I've been there with them for a couple of days. Now they're all gone.
Many more people have been wounded as authorities try to regain complete control of the city after what they say was an attempted military coup by the former Vice President, Riek Machar. The Juba government said it had arrested 10 major political figures and was hunting for its former Vice President. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, on a visit to the typhoon-ravaged Philippines, urged for a peaceful and democratic solution.
Political differences need to be resolved by peaceful and democratic means, and those have been hard fought for. The government should respect the rule of law, and the people of South Sudan should be able to realize their full potential in peace.
South Sudan has struggled to achieve a stable government since becoming independent from Sudan in 2011. But instead, the oil-rich country remains ethnically and politically divided.
Iran says it will resume technical talks with 6 world powers in Geneva in the coming 2 days. Iranian officials added that it is a vital step in implementing a deal signed last month which suspends key elements of Tehran's nuclear program in exchange for limited relief from sanctions. Diplomats said the task is highly complicated, but that progress was made during the last meeting in Vienna, even though differences remained. They said there is a real political will on both sides to carry out the agreement. Iran's deputy chief negotiators said the talks were set for an initial 2 days, but may continue if required. Christmas is still a week away, but a handful of penguins are bringing the festive cheers to a zoo in South Korea. In an amusement park on the outskirts of the capital, Seoul, visitors, children and adults alike were delighted by the sight of penguins strutting about in Santa suits. The penguins are set to welcome park visitors every day until Christmas with a mini parade. The Los Angeles Lakers beat the struggling Memphis Grizzlies 96-92. Kobe Bryant led the Lakers with 21 points, followed by Pau Gasol, who also added 21 points and 9 rebounds. Nick Young came off the bench and provided 18 points for the visiting team, who bounced back from Monday's setback in Atlanta to finish off a 4-game road trip. Zach Randolph led the Grizzlies with 18 points, 16 rebounds, and 5 assists, but the Grizzlies continued a 1-6 slump, with 5 of those losses coming on its home floor.
But you're right, should have fouled. And now the Grizzlies don't foul.
Investigators maintained a partial shutdown of construction at Manau's World Cup Stadium as officials continued to investigate the death of a worker there on Saturday. Construction was initially shut down on Monday after public prosecutors asked for work to halt pending investigation. The worker fell 35 meters while working on part of the roof, and now some workers have stopped construction in protest as they demanded safer working conditions. The incident is the 5th death at a stadium being built to host the 2014 World Cup. It was unclear when the go-ahead to continue with the stadium's roof would be given. And finally, it continues to be cold and cloudy tonight, with frost formation in most parts of the country, including the Northern Valley region. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperatures expected, but it will remain cold and cloudy with southeasterly winds. The morning hours will see some frost formation, especially in the hilly areas and desert regions. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect a cold night and mild tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King says in a letter to Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour, the Jordanian institutions work in a transparent manner as one team to serve the public interest. Egypt charges former President Mohamed Morsi and 35 other Islamists with conspiring with foreign groups to commit terrorist acts in the country. And South Sudan clashes kill up to 500 people, and the U.S. Secretary of State says political differences should be resolved by peaceful and democratic means. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.